All right, welcome everybody. It is so great to have everybody here, and we have an exciting speaker. And I'll introduce you to her in a little bit. But first of all, I just wanted to run around and say, how is everybody?
Good.
Good, good. Okay, how you doing? Aiden's good. Carlin's good. Okay, very good, very good. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to read a little scripture, and I want you to tell me a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about it. Okay, but first of all, our guest speaker today is going to talk a little bit about sleep, and she's going to talk a little bit about that. How many of you like to take a nap? How many of you like to sleep? Okay. Okay, some. Okay. All right, I think that comes with age. When I was your age, I didn't want to take a nap either. And now can I have a nap? Okay. When you need to sleep, do you sleep in your bedroom? Do you sleep best in the chair, out in a tree? Where do you sleep the best?
I usually sleep in my bedroom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And okay, Carlin in her bedroom too with the sprinkling lights. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about sleep in our scripture, and I'm going to share something. Would one of you be interested in reading for us today? Okay, Sammy, you're comfortable reading? Okay, I'm going to bring it up. And here we are. It's from the book, one of the books of the Bible, and it's called Proverbs. And Proverbs is filled with all different little sayings that are encouraged to help us lead better lives. Okay, and Benjamin Franklin actually talked a lot in Proverbs. He would say things like about living a good life. So Sammy, we're reading from the book of Proverbs, and it's chapter 3. And whenever you're ready, and if you have trouble with a word, we will help you. Okay.
Okay. My child, hold on to your wisdom and insight. Never let them get away from you. They will provide you with life and a pleasant and happy life. You can go safely on your way and never even stumble. You will not be afraid when you go to bed and when you will sleep soundly through the night. You will not have to worry about sudden disasters such as come on a wicked like a storm.
Okay, such as come on the wicked like a storm. Okay.
Wow.
Okay, that's right. You're doing really well.
God will keep you safe. Okay.
All right. I want you to read that first verse one more time. Okay.
To 22.
21, Sammy.
Okay. My child, hold on to your wisdom and insight. Never let them get away from you.
Okay, wisdom and insight. What is wisdom? What is wisdom? Anybody? What does it mean when you're wise?
It's kind of like being smart.
Kind of like being smart, right? Okay, that's very good. When you're smart, right? When you have knowledge of understanding, okay? And then the other word is wisdom and insight. Okay, I just wanted to cover that word, insight. Can anybody have a clue what insight might mean?
Information.
Okay, involves information, okay? Insight is sort of like when people who just are good at seeing the world around them, and so other people would walk through a room and not see something, and a person with a lot of insight would walk through the room and notice all the details. Okay, not everybody has a lot of insight. Some people have a lot of insight. Okay, so wisdom is like knowledge and understanding, and insight is like being able to see the world around them and all the details. Okay, maybe you're a person with a lot of insight, or maybe you know somebody with a lot of insight, or one of your parents. My father had a lot of insight. Okay, my father had a lot of insight, and I'm going to come back to you. We had a gravel driveway, and when we would go away when I was your age, and we'd come home and pull in the driveway, my dad would say, "Oh, our Uncle Junior was here, because he could tell by the tracks in the driveway. And he knew the route that Uncle Junior would take. It was a big driveway, really big. You could circle a load of hay on a wagon in our driveway. So it was really big. And he knew where Uncle Junior drove in the driveway. So he could drive into the driveway and say, Uncle Junior was here, or somebody else was there by the tracks in the driveway. That's insight, okay? And you're going to come across some people who have a lot of insight. All right, so when you are, let's go back to the reading here. Okay, so when you have a lot, hold on to your wisdom and your insight and understand things, because when you do that, you'll be able to sleep soundly through the night, okay? Knowing that God will be with you. So when we have an understanding of what's happening in the world, we sleep better, okay? What are some things that may cause you to not sleep well? Okay, any thoughts?
You're like nervous about something.
When you're nervous about something, right, okay? And for some odd reason, your brain is like, oh, I'm nervous, so I can't sleep, okay? Aiden, do certain things affect your sleep?
Maybe being afraid of something.
Being afraid of something, okay. Yep,
Deprivation.
I was afraid of vampires when I was your age, and I always slept with all my blankets around my neck because I was afraid they were going to bite me. Okay. Excuse me, Sammy. Is there a time where your sleep is affected?
Watching a scary movie.
Watching a scary movie. Okay, that affects, right. Okay, so we're talking about sleep a lot, and I know our guest speaker said she was going to talk about sleep and some other things. So I'm going to introduce you to our guest speaker for today's class. And I failed to ask, Erika, what would you like the kids to call you?
Oh, Erika is perfect.
Okay, but I'm going to introduce you as Dr. Hagen.
Okay.
And but you can call her Erika. But Dr. Hagen's going to tell us a little bit about herself, what she does for a living, what she has studied over the years, and I'm going to let her talk. Okay. So welcome, Dr. Hagen.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hello. Thanks for having me. I'm glad you all came tonight. I am an epidemiologist that studies sleep. So that means that I've been trained in all the methods that scientists use in the field of epidemiology. And then I apply that to understanding how sleep affects our health. So I'm going to talk about both epidemiology and sleep. And Jeff's had some great lead-ins without us even communicating about ways of knowing and how sleep can affect us. So I'm going to share some slides just to help. Oh, now I have, sorry, what did I just do? 1 second. I have to remember how to do this each time. Share. And now I'm gonna, can you see this?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about how sleep affects our health and how the science of epidemiology contributes to how we understand the connections between sleep and health. So I sort of modeled this a little bit like how we do our professional talks. And usually when we do these professional talks, we have this slide that comes up that gives you kind of a preview of the things we're going to talk about. So I have like sort of 3 areas that we'll talk about, and you guys can ask me any questions that you want about any of this stuff as we go or at the end. So I'm going to talk a little bit about epidemiology and what it means and what kind of things that epidemiologists do and what we know from the work that epidemiologists do. And I'm going to talk about how epidemiologists study sleep and a little bit about what epidemiologists have learned about sleep so that we can, things that help us understand why sleep is important. So there's a lot of words on here, but it's mostly to help me stay on track. So epidemiology is a branch of science that helps us understand patterns and causes of health, disease, and injury. So that means that we look for things that are associated with diseases and also things that are associated with people staying healthy. So it's not just diseases that epidemiologists study. It's also the things that lead to good health. So we can study all sorts of things about how human bodies work, and then how they work best, and then what things are increase your risk for bad things happening, and what things increase the chances that good things will happen. Lots of times epidemiologists are called disease detectives because it's kind of a good analogy for understanding like what it is that we're trying to do. So it's like we see a certain problem, and then we have to, just like detectives, like in a crime scene, we don't know at the beginning what is causing whatever condition that we're wondering about. We have to start gathering lots of information. We're looking for clues. We're looking for what's associated with what. And once we sort of get these beginning clues, then we can develop studies that help us investigate and gather information in a systematic way so that we can try to answer questions. But just like detectives in a crime scene, we're looking for clues. So like, if you imagine like, you know, I don't know, a break into a home, and then the detectives come and they want to understand what happened, you might look for clues like, was a window broken? Is there blood there? Are we looking for somebody who hurt their hand? Or, you know, so there's clues like that. And sort of in an analogous way, we try to think about clues that lead us to bigger questions that we can investigate when we're trying to study and understand how to keep people healthy. So the answers to the studies that epidemiologists do and the questions that we ask lead to some of the big understandings that we have about what causes disease and what causes people to stay healthy. So I have some examples here. So it's epidemiologists and the data that they collected that led to the understanding that smoking is a cause of lung cancer. So it's hard to imagine at this point, right? But like a long time ago, we didn't know that smoking cigarettes would lead to lung cancer. But it was epidemiologists who did studies and figured that out. Now everybody knows that. But you know, a long time ago, we didn't know that. It's epidemiologists who understand that when there's bacteria or certain kinds of germs in water, it's associated with digestive diseases. So this can happen even in the US, but it's much more common in places where there's where water isn't treated and it doesn't come out of a faucet, that there could be bacteria in the water. There could be bacteria in water because like people get it in a place where animals are also. And so like feces, that means poop. Like if poop gets in the water, there could be bacteria in the water. And if people drink that, it can make them have a digestive disease. So it might make them have diarrhea or throw up. So that wasn't something that was understood at one point, and it was epidemiologists who figured that out. Eating fruits and vegetables lowers your risk for lots of kinds of cancer. That's information that we get from epidemiology studies. And getting sufficient sleep, so that means enough sleep, is associated with lowering your risk for obesity. So that's another thing that epidemiologists have figured out, and it's kind of a newer piece of information because sleep epidemiology is a newer field, and it wasn't studied very widely even like 30 years ago. So the reason why epidemiology is important is because it helps the people who make laws and policies and guidelines to know what to recommend. So when you go to the doctor and they say, I don't know if you guys have ever seen these forms that get filled out, but your parents maybe have filled it out for you, or maybe the doctor just asks you. They might ask you like, how many servings of milk do you drink each day? And how many fruits and vegetables do you eat each day? And are you drinking lots of soda, or do you mostly drink water? You know, they ask you those questions, and then based on your answers to those questions, they might give you some guidelines for what you could do to, you know, just do a little bit better and be a little bit more healthy. Well, the reason why we know that those things are associated with being more healthy is because of studies that epidemiologists do. So we find out that fruits and vegetables can lower your risk for cancer. I mean, fruits and vegetables affect lots of things, but for instance, they affect your risk for cancer. So then the Food and Drug Administration comes out with recommendations so that people know what to do if they want to be healthy. So the way they come up with recommendations and policies and laws is of course complicated. It's not black and white or super easy, but based on the best information we have, then we develop certain laws and guidelines. So because of the association of smoking with lots of bad health outcomes, there's a law in lots of places that you cannot smoke inside a restaurant and you cannot smoke in an airplane.
Can I ask a quick question? Sorry to interrupt. How many of you have been on an airplane?
You've been, okay.
Did you know at one time, you've all been on an airplane, probably more often than I have. There was a time when you could smoke cigarettes on an airplane during a flight.
But
Yeah,
isn't that dangerous?
Okay, Erika will answer that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit dangerous because of the fire risk. Is that what you're talking about? Like having a flame? Yeah, it is. But even more than that, so there is some risk associated with that. But even if there was no risk of like something catching on fire, having all that smoke in a small space and having everybody breathe it in is bad for the people's health, not just the person smoking, but all the other people who have to breathe in that air. And so secondhand smoke is what we call it when somebody else is smoking, but you're breathing in the smoky air. That we know from work that epidemiologists do increases your risk for bad outcomes, even if you're not the one inhaling the cigarette directly into your lungs. So that's why, because of studies that epidemiologists did and the knowledge that they gained from those studies, now we have laws that protect people. And so you can't smoke on a plane, you can't smoke in a restaurant. It wasn't that long ago that you could do both of those things. But now, because of more evidence and more information, and just because of changing, well, I mean, laws are based not only on epidemiology, but also other forces, but mainly driven by the knowledge that we have about the bad health effects. Now there's laws that you cannot do that. The regulations, so the water that comes out of your tap, when you just go to the sink and turn it on, that water is cleaned according to sets of laws and regulations, and the amount that it gets cleaned and the way that it gets cleaned and the things that are taken out of the water are all based on epidemiology. So when the systems that cities use to clean the water are based on understanding what things in water are good for people, like we put fluoride in the water so that your teeth can be healthy, but we take out things from the water, like certain kinds of bacteria and metals and other things that when you drink it, it can build up in your body and make you sick over time. And then recommendations that adults should sleep 7 to 8 hours a day, that's based on epidemiology studies too. So all these guidelines and policies that we have are based on evidence from studies. Another thing that you all might have heard about is the COVID-19 pandemic, and there's lots of guidelines, right, that we have to live with now based on reducing risk for people to get infected and reducing risk for people to get very sick. And some of this information comes from basic scientists who tried to understand really quickly when this new disease emerged, like what the properties of the virus were. And some of the information comes from epidemiology studies. One really good example of studies that epidemiologists did was with understanding that disease transmission is much less frequent when people are breathing outdoor air than when people are breathing indoor air. So there were studies that epidemiologists did, data that were collected about counting up how many people got sick and infected in various situations, and what happens when people are outside versus inside, what happens when people are wearing masks versus not wearing masks. So epidemiologists have contributed a lot to our understanding of how this disease is transmitted, and epidemiology has contributed a lot to all the rules that we all have to live with now as we're trying to live through this pandemic. Okay, so now I'm going to talk just a little bit about how epidemiologists answer their questions. So epidemiologists use observational data. Do you guys know, what does it mean when you observe something?
To look at it.
Okay, you could look at it. What's another way you could observe something? If you hear an airplane go overhead, like oh, I just sort of gave it away. So you can hear things. Like if you hear a certain sound, you're observing the presence of a noise, and then that presence of a noise can indicate to you something. So we observe through our senses. And Sammy's right that a lot of how we observe is by looking at things. In epidemiology, we count things. So we count up how many people have a certain disease. If we want to know what's the prevalence of the disease in our county, then we count up how many people have it. We count up how many people there are in total, and then we can figure out a percentage of people that have it. And part of that doesn't sound very groundbreaking, but part of understanding what things are affecting people's health and how big a problem it is comes down to just knowing how many people in a population have whatever problem it is that you're wondering about.
Okay, it sounds like epidemiologists do a lot of math.
They do a lot of math. It's a lot of math, especially when you think about the way that we measure things and the way that we make models. So we make math equations like and solve for the parts that we don't understand or that we don't know. And so, yes, we use a lot of math to take all the measurements and the things that we observe in the world and then turn it into understanding a pattern. And then it's that pattern that can help us draw a conclusion so that we can give advice to people based on what we know from what happens. So the way we measure stuff is super important because your data is really only as good as your measurement. And if you're measuring something inaccurately, then your answer that you get at the end is going to be inaccurate. So we spend lots of effort figuring out the best way to measure something. And then of course, we also have to figure out what it is we're trying to measure. Those are the two kind of most important things. So there's a number of ways. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about sleep and how we measure things in sleep. And I see there's not a lot of time. So I'm going to just show you a little bit about these things. So there's something that's called polysomnography, where this is one of the main ways that we collect information about what is happening in your brain while you're sleeping. Sleep happens in your brain and sleep is for your brain. So like as sleep scientists, we say that sleep is of and for the brain. Like it is your brain that changes when you're sleeping compared to when you're awake. And it is your brain that benefits from sleeping. So you can see the picture on the left is a young woman who's got these leads attached to her head. And that's so that we can measure the electric currents that are happening in your brain while you're sleeping. And then you can see the picture in the middle. There's also bands around this man's chest. You measure the pressure in your chest as you breathe in and out. And then there's a sensor on his finger that measures oxygen levels while the person is sleeping. There's a lead on his chin. Your chin quivers when you sleep in a way that's different than your face is when you're not sleeping. And then there's a sensor right under his nose that's measuring airflow in and out. So all these things together get you to the picture that's on the far right, where you can see all those squiggly lines. And all that information together tells us what's happening in your brain, what's happening with your breathing, and what's happening with movement in certain parts of your body. And then we can tell which stage of sleep you're in. So this is really like rich data. It's pretty expensive to collect because you have to sleep in a lab and you have to have all this equipment attached to you.
Can
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Sammy.
Can you also do that through an MRI?
An MRI is similar technology that's measuring different aspects of your brain.
Oh.
Okay, and it may look a little scary, but I've had sleep studies done, and it's not painful at all.
Yeah,
it feels kind of weird, but it's not painful at all.
Yeah, you get a bunch of stuff stuck to you. So when you're done, there's like all these like kind of it feels like these strings kind of attached to your body. But like Jeff said, it doesn't hurt. It's just like it feels like there's a lot of stuff on you then. It is kind of weird to sleep then once you have all this stuff attached to you.
Yeah.
Another way that we measure sleep is with an accelerometer, or it's sometimes called an actigraph. And it's similar, if you guys have those fitness trackers that measure your steps, or you've seen people use those, yeah, there, like just like that. So, oh, I see, Aiden has one too. So some of those measure steps only, and some of them also measure things about your sleep. And the way they do it is by, it's an algorithm, which means it's a math equation. Oh yeah, yours looks pretty fancy. It looks like it does measure your sleep. So it's an algorithm, which means a math equation that takes the information about how much your arm is moving through 3 dimensions, or a lot of them use 3 dimensions. I don't know. There's might be some that are more sophisticated now too, but there's 3 planes of movement that of information that gets measured inside that little box that you wear on your wrist, just like a Fitbit. And then all that math data that gets collected, it's like measuring how fast it's moving and in what direction it's moving. So when your arm goes like this, it's measuring the movement in these 3 different planes, and then it makes this equation. And then based on information that we know, it makes a very good estimate of whether the person wearing it is sleeping or awake. So that's another way we collect data. This is a simple way. We ask people questions. We say, what time did you go to bed? What time did you wake up? Did you take any naps? How long did you sleep? And you write it down each day. Like as you're going to sleep, you write, you know, it's 8:30, I'm going to sleep. In the morning when you wake up, you say it's 7:05, you write that down. So, and we ask, when we collect it this way, we ask people to write it down each day as it's happening. And then sometimes we just ask people questions. So we get some basic information about how long people sleep and how variable it is by just asking. You can I'm going to skip this part. There's also ways to measure sleepiness. That's another important thing that we study in my research group, and that's important for lots of health outcomes. I'm going to skip this part too, because, right? Yeah, okay. And talk about a little bit of what we've learned about sleep by doing studies where we measure carefully people's sleep, and we also measure carefully other things that we think might be associated with sleep. And then we use math equations to see if they are. So there's a lot of research that has been done both in kids and adults that shows that getting enough sleep, and for kids, it's a little bit unknown exactly what enough means, but somewhere between 9 and 12 hours for kids is enough sleep. And that'll vary by how old you are. And also it varies a little bit by individual, but about 9 to 12 hours of sleep is important for kids, which of course is a huge range, right? So you have to figure out what works best for you. But getting enough sleep is associated with being happier, with being more alert, with being able to pay attention better, with learning and memory, with being resilient. You know, so that means like if you get knocked down by something, I mean like in a metaphorical way. So like if something gets you down in life, being able to bounce back from that and feel better sooner and recover and look at the bright side after something bad happens. And your immune system function. So like how well you can fight off germs, how quickly you can recover if you do get sick. Sleep is important for helping with all of those things. Not getting enough sleep can make you more grumpy, more irritable. It can contribute to gaining more weight than is healthy. It can increase your risk for diabetes, for anxiety and depression, for allergic rhinitis. That means allergies. Not doing as well in school, and having high blood pressure. So I will say that sleep is not the only thing that affects each of these things that I just listed. You can have trouble with some of these things, even if you get enough sleep. So it's not like sleep is the only thing that affects it, but sleep does play a part in all of these things. So it's important to get enough sleep. So I'll just end with, you know, it is hard. Some people have a hard time sleeping. And if you have a hard time sleeping, sometimes we call that insomnia. Like if you try to go to sleep and you can't, or you wake up a whole bunch of times in the night, or you wake up too early. And that's a problem that sometimes there's small things that you can do to help, but sometimes it's not your fault and there's nothing that you can, you know, it's hard to do something about it. But something that is easier to do something about is giving yourself enough time to go to sleep. So getting to bed on time, not staying up too late, getting off your screens an hour or more before you try to go to bed, having a bedtime routine. So just like when you're a baby, it's important when your whole life to kind of have a routine and do similar things before you go to bed each night to cue your body that it's time to sleep. So reading a book or taking a bath or doing your shower or whatever it is that you do, it almost, I mean, as long as it's not an activity that sort of revs you up and makes you more excited, it can be anything as long as it's some kind of, and it can be short, but just a small set of things that you do the same each night can help you go to bed when it's time to go to bed. And also not eating and drinking too close to bedtime. So making sure you get enough snacks and enough dinner and enough to eat so that you're not eating right up until the time that you go to bed. It can also, especially if you have a hard time falling asleep, that's something that can help you fall asleep more easily. So that's all I got. But if you have any questions, I'd be happy to talk about whatever you want.
Do any of you have a bedtime routine, something you do before you go to sleep? It helps you sleep?
I brush my teeth and sometimes take my bath.
Okay.
Yeah. What were you said you kind of have one, Carlin? What's yours?
Well, typically I'll brush my teeth and then read a little bit of a book.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. I mean, it's common because it's so effective. It's really calming and can help
I
us.
read a book too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yep, I read too, but not if it's too scary. Then I'm afraid at the
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or upsetting.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I got to pick my bedtime reading with care.
Right. Any other questions for Dr. Hagen? Okay, lots of information and helpful. Okay, so sleep is so important, and how do you go to bed and all those things, very important. All right, so, okay, what do we say to
Thank
Dr.
you.
Hagen?
You're welcome.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. And so we will see you next time. Have a great night, okay?
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Good to see you all.
Thank you.